For those of you who haven't had a chance to participate in some of the prior presentations over this month, we have an opportunity today to sort of encapsulate a lot of the work and discussions that have occurred over the previous 4 weeks. Unfortunately, I am going to have to end my participation a little bit early today. I've had some unexpected need for travel, personal needs, and so I'll have to leave a little bit early. But I am grateful that I've had an opportunity to be invited to just say a few opening comments as we start today's meeting. Rick, could you forward to the next slide, please?
Yes.
So I wanted to just take a few minutes to sort of frame, if you will, the conversation to happen today. Again, for those of you who participated, you remember that we've spent a bit of time sort of thinking through and getting some expert facilitated discussions around what is a learning health system and so forth. But for today, just to kind of level set things as we go forward, I just want to take a minute and I just have a few words up here about our UAB mission. And, there's some key phrases here in terms of dedicated to excellence. You'll notice in that first line, there's some discussions about our world-class patient care. And you'll hear us talk about medical science and pioneering research and, excellent training and dedication to patient-centered care. One thing I would like to highlight in those phrases, though, is you notice how they tend to speak about these things as if they're separate, isolated things. And yet, in reality, they're very interrelated. Research begets better patient care. Research begets better quality. Quality begets better patient care. And certainly training of our residents and medical students begets all of these things, right? So they're very interrelated. So the learning health system, we won't go into the definition. We'll hear more about that a little bit later. It can be considered a foundation for how we actually execute on all of these various interrelated goals and objectives. It can provide a very single organizing framework for all of these things. A lot of times, again, we think about research and quality and clinical care as very separate things. But I'll submit to you all that that's been a false trichotomy, if you will, that has prevented us from being as effective in all of these things as an organization. Can you go to the next slide, Rick? So this is just sort of highlighting the concept that when all said and done around clinical care, quality and research, et cetera, that the learning health system can serve as an organizing principle, and by which we can execute all of these things, not as separate siloed efforts, but as a single multifaceted goal and objective. Next slide. So how did we get here to this meeting today? Well, I'll tell you, it's been a very interesting journey for me. I stepped into this role of Chief Physician Executive and President of the Practice Plan a little bit over 3 years ago. And I'll tell you, I'd been a department chair for about 10 years prior to that. But stepping into this role for the first time, I actually got a chance to have a panoramic view of all things as it relates to the mission. And it's been quite eye-opening. First and foremost, wow, what an amazing organization we are. However, we are doing this work in silos in terms of thinking about clinical care, research, and quality as separate things. What occurred is over time, some small groups were evolved thinking about learning health system. I was in various meetings in quality care, at various meetings around value-based care and our accountable care organization. And, I had a chance to meet with some people working in the hospital, and they all started talking about working in ways that really centered around this concept of learning health system. So a lot of small groups started coming together around it. And in fact, it led to some initial, RFP a couple of years ago, where we were funding some research ideas or some learning health system type of research ideas. And I'll tell you, the response that we all received around that RFP was dramatic. again, indicating just how much I think there is this grassroots desire, not knowing exactly how to frame it, but this desire to create synergy around the concepts of clinical care research and quality. Accessing stakeholders to get their perceptions. Trudy and others have done some work in the Department of Preventive Medicine, some pilot projects, just interviewing to get some perspective. What do the leadership of the organization think a learning health system is? And then engaging more broadly through this 3D process, which is going to culminate today, and hopefully in drawing many more of you in to helping us move our organization and structuring our organization in such a way that we begin working to execute on patient care and quality and research as a single entity and not the separate things. So I'll stop there and I'll let, I think Mike, maybe you're up next, or whoever is up next is going to please take over. But I do think that we're on an interesting time in our organization in being able to think about these things collectively instead of in silos.
Great. Thanks, Tony. I think I'm actually on deck. One request I just wanted to make for those who are listening in is if you could just make sure that you're muted. That way we can hopefully keep the background noise to a minimum. So what I wanted to do, I had the opportunity with our group, the Clinical Practice Transformation Group, to apply an approach that we use very commonly in the work that we do mostly in the clinical spaces, which is called 3D problem solving, which I will give you a quick overview. And what I wanted to do is just kind of give you a high level view of the process that we engaged in really over the past, I would say 5 weeks or so, with great engagement from a number of the participants in this meeting to actually try to understand what it takes and what the issues and concerns are related to operationalizing a learning health system. And the way that we started our process is by coming up with just a definition of a learning health system. There are many definitions out there. And what we shared was this AHRQ definition, which I'll just read real quick, is a health system in which internal data and experience are systematically integrated with external evidence, and that knowledge is put into practice. As a result, patients get higher quality, safer, more efficient care, and healthcare delivery organizations become better places to work. So we kind of put that out there and said, here's a working definition of a learning health system, through AHRQ. And we applied this process, which we call 3D problem solving. And it really stands for, it's sort of an acronym for a discover, a distill, and a define phase. And really what it is I would frame it as organized brainstorming from a very high level, broad contribution of issues, anything that comes up within the participants around a particular question, and that we then progressively narrow it down to themes and to specific areas of focus with subtopics that ultimately guide where the work should begin and how we should move forward. And I guess the way I would qualify this a little bit, because there are many similar processes out there, is that I think what distinguishes our process from, say, value stream mapping, or there are whole affinity diagrams, those kinds of things, is that we really look at the system challenge or the opportunity really in the clinical context as almost being a patient, where we are all collectively a patient, if you will, that we need to actually understand what's going on. And so when a patient comes into our clinic, we don't just start collecting data with labs and diagnostics. We actually start to engage them and asking them, what's going on, what's wrong, how are you feeling? And so there's an emotional component, there's an opportunity for people to contribute. And it's a different way of identifying where one can focus ultimately and apply, the diagnostics and the more formal processes of performance and quality improvement. But it's a way that in a lot of instances actually provides a pretty quick shortcut to identifying where you're going. So, you know, again, in a patient context, a patient doesn't come in, you just do a battery of tests to figure out what's going on. Generally, they'll say, you know, my stomach hurts, and you go, okay, let's start looking there. So this process essentially gets us going in that direction. So we probably had about, I'm going to say close to 40 people that we had initially started with the intent of just, you know, doing a single session and then doing some background work. But people were so engaged that it actually turned into multiple sessions. And I think the results that you see are going to be telling about sort of the comprehensive nature of at least the participants that we tried to get across the spectrum to get the information. So in the first phase of this, sort of the discovery of issues and concerns, we essentially here on the top left put this question forward: what are the issues and concerns related to creating an operational learning health system at UAB? That was the question. Vague, open-ended. And as a result, what we basically do in this process is we just let people share, sort of in tweet form, if you will, very short bullets of what their concerns are. Some of them are systems focused, some of them are feelings. You know, we're very focused system-based to not be people-centric, you know, recognizing that it's the systems that really need attention. So there's some facilitation, but essentially we just try to get it all out there. And so this is just an example. You know, you can read some of these. I'm not going to go through these in any detail. Ultimately, we start to organize them into themes, which you start to see with these colors here, which is sort of a second step. But, you know, we got a fair amount in the course of, you know, an hour and a half or so of different issues and concerns that came up. And basically, when we had captured that information, then we started this distillation process, which you saw, some of the colors, you know, trying to say what's alike without naming them, and how do we actually then start to think about what that commonality is across issues and concerns. And so basically where we landed was over this period of the discovery, we got about 131 issues from the group. And in the process of pulling them together into themes, we identified 8 themes that really summed up the content of this brainstorm, if you will. And those are the following: right data, right time, improved performance, so the data piece, empowering integrated learning and innovation, creating a structure for aligned and informed prioritization, enhancing and integrating stakeholder engagement, cultivating engagement and collaboration with learning health systems beyond UAB, realigning resources to support LHS priorities, optimizing regulatory and administrative research processes, and finally, assimilating improvements into an aligned learning health system at UAB. So in stepping back from this, you know, we basically said if we addressed all of these things perfectly, if you will, we would have a really good chance of having an operational learning health system. You know, that's kind of the gut check, if you will. And then from there, basically the next step is to kind of say, you know, within those themes, there are a lot of subtopics. And so that distillation process then brought us back to those issues under the themes, the organized themes, and essentially identified subtopics within these topics, within these themes. So I'm not going to read them all out. You can take a look at them and we can share them, of course, later on. But for example, under right data, right time, improved performance, you might have something like, you know, access, analysis, and integration, roles and responsibilities, data governance, for creating a structure for aligned and informed prioritization as that third theme, again, not prioritized, but just as a theme, inclusive engagement to inform prioritized improvement decision-making, clear communication of priorities, actually understanding what a learning health system is. So all of these things really have elements that start to identify where we really need to do the work. Like where are we ultimately in this list of 8 themes and, you know, multiple subtopics going to prioritize our attention, recognizing that we can't do all of this and everything being connected. If we pick that right subset, we're actually going to get most of what's on this page addressed through the work that follows. So Allyson, I think, is now going to kind of share the relationship of what was going on in parallel to the past 4 weeks of presentations in our month, our LHS Learning Month, and to try and provide links, between the presentations that were made, the themes, with, what we identified as a group.
All right, so thanks. Next slide. So I observed that we have several, I guess, high-level themes or high-level key take-home points that we got from all of our speakers during the last 4 weeks. And in collaboration with our colleagues at the core, Sarah Levy and Aliyah Tanagar, we began to sort of try and again match these high-level learnings, if you will, from the 4 weeks of speakers to these 3D themes, in part as a check to make sure that our 3D themes perhaps are in line with what experts are saying with regard to the learning health system. So on this first slide, obviously we began our month with a talk by Charles Friedman from Michigan, who gave us a really good overview, a good set of definitions of what learning health systems are, including the ARC definition that we heard from earlier. For me, I think the key take-home point from this particular slide and Dr. Friedman's talk is a reminder that this is a cyclical process. So it's a cyclical, involved process that involves using data to identify an issue of concern, developing some intervention or innovations, checking whether or not that works. And so this is a cyclical process that is embedded within a very intentional learning community. And so when we think about the 3D themes, this idea of creating a structure to support integrated learning and an innovation is perhaps very, very key for our own prioritization, or for where we are sort of thinking about moving, or in terms of how we're thinking about moving forward. So a real key take-home point, again, is that we want to begin at what Dr. Friedman says is 5 o'clock, meaning establishing that intentional learning community, and then thinking about embedding our learnings within our activities within that learning community. Next slide. The second sort of high-level theme for me that was sort of emerging out of these talks is, again, the intentionality behind our learning health system. It doesn't just sort of happen on its own. And I think Dr. Rothman in the second week really highlighted for us the examples that are going on in Vanderbilt between operations and the research community, intentionally pulling those two communities together to really, again, sort of think about what are the key priorities for the learning health systems. Not lost on his talk as well was the heavy emphasis on recognizing that patients and their families ought to be at the center of all that we do, and that we want to think intentionally about not only engaging ourselves, but how do we engage our larger stakeholder communities that include patients and their families. And of course, making sure that our resources are aligned in that intentionality to support our learning health system priorities. Next slide. And of course, learning health systems, learning communities don't only occur within the 4 walls of UAB, or the 8 walls of UAB, but can actually be taken to scale. And so when we think about the 3D theme that around cultivating engagement and collaborations beyond learning health systems, I think Dr. Friedman eloquently reminded us of that fact, that it's not just about UAB, but it's beyond our walls. Next slide. And then our next set of talks, the last 2 weeks, really emphasized, I think, what we're doing here at UAB. And certainly the talks by Dr. Catherine Meese and Dr. Shay Palanchi really brought home for me this idea that research within our own health system can drive improvement. And this is not unknown to any of us who are on the Zoom, but really sort of emphasize that if we get good data, that can drive improvement. So Catherine's talk, for example, highlighted some of the distress that our healthcare workers were experiencing during the COVID pandemic. And we naturally expect that information will then be used to drive some kind of change or innovation. And then Dr. Palanchi's work, looking at happy or pressure injury pressure injuries within the health system and the development of innovations to reduce the incidence or prevalence of pressure injuries is is a really good, successful example of a learning health system at work. And both of these projects have been disseminated beyond the UAB walls, if you will. They've been put into the peer-reviewed literature. So research and dissemination, next slide, are important. And certainly writing in the academic literature is important. It's important for many of us on this call in terms of our career trajectories. But as a learning health system, we need to remind ourselves that dissemination doesn't only occur within the peer-reviewed realm, but also needs to occur within our own community to support learnings and innovation, as well as other communities that are working with us. And then my final slide, to sort of bring it all home, sort of says data, data, data. We can't do what we want to do without data. And getting access to data doesn't only mean getting access to raw data, but successfully changing or transforming that data into some kind of usable analytic data set. And Mike's talk, I think, provided a really good proof of concept. Well, Mike's talk sort of coupled with the talks by Dr. Kodaneva and Dr. Howell, I think provided a really good proof of concept of how we can build a structure that can extract data, but also transform data that can be used by researchers to inform learnings within our health system. So for me, those were the key lessons that I learned throughout our 4-week journey that I think align well, very nicely with the 3D themes that Rick just spoke about.
Thanks, Allyson. So I guess, maybe as a pause here, this is really, I think, the thrust of what we wanted to present to you all. We're trying to make this as engaging and as much of a conversation as possible. Is, it might be appropriate here just to kind of ask the question from those of you who have been able to participate in some of the prior presentations. Are there any other things for you that kind of stand out as being key elements to a learning health system? And let me just frame this again by kind of moving towards the point where we actually need your input on. And that is defining the priorities as to how we actually start to put together a learning health system in a way that's operational and that actually accomplishes the objectives that have been highlighted and emphasized in the prior presentations, as well as things that connect the work that we all are doing in our multiple domains, be it clinical, pure research, or administrative. That continuum and that circular pattern is where do we start and how do we actually pull this all together in a meaningful way? So what we're really trying to do, and I'm going to invite this you all to have a conversation here, is we're really trying to sort of anchor ourselves around these 8 themes, if you will, that we've identified in the 3D, recognizing that these are not static, that these can evolve into more wordsmithed, more appropriate language if that's needed. But ultimately trying to look at, of these 8, where do we start? And the way we look at it in CPT is, we always talk about the critical 20%, which is Pareto's law, that 20% of the variables or inputs create 80% of the outcomes. And so the idea here, and what we use, again, this process for, is to say that if we choose the appropriate starting point, they're all connected, by taking on, say, 1 or 2 of these areas of focus as a starting point, we are naturally going to actually spread into other areas and accomplish what's needed beyond those domains. So we don't want to be doing scattered work everywhere. We want to say, start here and let it expand. So this is where we're going to kind of open it up to discussion, and recognizing that we have a lot of people. I'm going to also open up this Mentimeter opportunity to type in some responses. So real quick before we move on to the conversation, I'm just going to pull up this information again for those of you who might not have had an opportunity to log into Mentimeter. You can either type in, the website and punch in the code when you're prompted at the bottom, 98913646, or just use the QR code, take a picture of it, and it'll log you right into the site. So I'm just going to pause here for about 15 seconds. And then, essentially what we're going to want to do is start to have a conversation with your input as far as where we start, and, essentially collectively come to a sense of direction and how we then move things forward. Is everybody okay with the logins, hopefully? So just, here are the 8 themes, and we'll come back to those. But the real question that I wanted to open up for discussion, but also invite you all to provide some short text responses to, is to the following question. From your perspective, what is most important to you in operationalizing a learning health system at UAB? So you can go into your app and start to enter that, and I can basically hide this, and as you type things in, they will start to show up if it works the way it's supposed to. And at the same time, I would invite people to just share with the group, what their thoughts are. What's most important to you all? So we're getting a lot of good written, lots of data answers, buy-in from stakeholders. Anybody have any comments, any thoughts, verbal contributions in addition?
I'll go. I have a lot of thoughts, but I put the one creating a data group that connects the research data side to the clinical data side. And I'm Heather Martin. I'm a 3rd-year PhD student in health services administration and health informatics. Great. I put that comment in because I've been working on trying to get this clinical data for my dissertation. And I've also worked at the Informatics Institute during my PhD program. And I've really seen over that time this hand between the data, the clinical data that's available to the research, like in I2B2 and EDW, and then the additional data that's available throughout the rest of the health system. And I feel like we need some type of group that can help make those connections, because all the data that I want to use is not in I2B2 and EDW. And I've had to send email after email after email and really push to say, I want to use this data in the clinic and get that pushed to the research side. And it's been a learning experience, but I really could see the division there. And at the same time, I understand the division, because the people on the clinical side don't need to be answering research questions all day because they need to do their job. So it would just be great if we could have a group that helped facilitate those conversations between the 2 data groups, so we can actually get the data that we need to evaluate if the interventions we're doing on the clinic side are impactful.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Hi, this is Ben Ozaiden. I'm in Health Services Administration Department with Health Informatics program. Mm-hmm. I put in having system development and testing environments especially for any kinds of solution that involves any information system. Having these 3 layers of environments, one for development, one for testing, one for production. Any ideas that come through, I think we want to be able to do this in a safe environment where we don't break anything, test new ideas, new models, and and then be able to move it forward from there to a production environment. I think that's crucial for a learning health system.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hi, this is Maria Shari. I'm with the School of Nursing. I'm an associate dean for clinical and global partnerships. And one of the things that really resonated with me was when our colleague from Vanderbilt did his presentation on the roadmap for a learning health system that Vanderbilt used. I was very impressed with the whole notion of using the group as a consultative entity, if you will, a group with individuals with multiple specialties who can help you to really look at successful projects that currently exist and helping you to think of possibilities on how to elevate them to the next level.
Great. Thank you, Maria. Any other thoughts? Does the list, if that of themes, does that resonate with you all? Does it feel, are we missing anything? Does anything come to mind as far as approach is concerned?
Rick, I'm only seeing 11 here. I wondered if there were more that we can't see where it says the 35 and the little person.
Yeah, I'm got to see how that, I'm not sure. It should be scrolling, so you're right. I'm not sure that I would probably have to log out and figure out how to do that, but I'm sure there are other inputs. So why don't we do this as a starting point? So the next question really is we're focusing on these 8 themes, right? So what we're going to ask you all to do now is on this next slide here is I'm going to actually just hide the results. So just so that you see what's behind this is there's going to be sort of a ranking of the 8 that we're going to ask you to engage in. So the question to respond to is if we could only begin work in one area, so you've got to pick one area, which one would you consider most important? So this is the first of 2 questions. One is, which one is the most important? So I'm going to have you guys put your vote in. Again, we could only work on one area. Which one would you focus on? And then we'll look at what that is and have a conversation around that. So we've got about, I think, 33 people who have logged on, and the bottom right there shows how many people have responded. So I'm getting a good response here. Seems to be working. Let's see what our number is here.
Hey, Rick, my mentee is still stuck on the first question.
At the top of your phone, you have to, it says the presenter has changed to slide and you have to say hit go to slide. Are you seeing that?
No.
Or at the bottom, it says go to next question.
It says, please wait for the presenter to show the next slide.
Is there a gray box that says refresh?
Yeah, I click it and nothing happens.
Okay. You can go to the top under your browser link where it has the Menti link, click it, and hit go again to refresh the page.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm glad we have Mentimeter experts on here. Clearly, I'm an ignorant user. So we've got about 39 hits. I'm going to just keep it open for, to say, another 10 seconds. All right, everybody who's responded has responded. Anybody still need time? All right, let's see what the result is. So distribution is right data. So it's about data, creating a structure for aligned and informed prioritization, and realigning resources to support LHS priority. So how do people think about these results? Anybody want to challenge? Anybody want to make a pitch?
I want to challenge. May I challenge? I do think data is extremely important for the analysis, but I put the 8% enhancing and integrating stakeholder engagement. And that's because I think that we really have to assess what the problem is before we decide what our intervention is, for it to go through that feedback loop for an continuous improvement. And to do that, we have to talk to our stakeholders to know where to focus our efforts. And that's so important. Data is a part of that, because data can confirm that assessment if there is an area we need to focus our efforts on. But I think we've got to involve the stakeholders in that. And also, once we implement the intervention, stakeholder engagement is huge for getting that intervention to be able to work how we intend it to. So that's why I put that one.
Great. So one thing you're going to recognize, Heather, is that all of these things are important, all 8. And part of the way to think about this is, sometimes there's a sequence where you have to do one thing before you can do something else. And other times, there are things that we're already doing really well. Like it might be the most important starting point, we're doing really well, but the areas that are highlighted are that need the most work. So it's part of the way of looking at what your comment around enhancing and integrating stakeholder engagement would be, if we were to do the 3 highlighted areas well, successfully, would we get there? Would enhancing stakeholder engagement naturally be a part of accomplishing those other 4, and the other 3, the main hits? If the answer is yes, then we'll get there. And if the answer is not really, then that becomes an area of focus that we're going to also have to look at, right? So that's how we start to kind of tease this stuff apart. Any other comments? So this is good. I mean, so, out of the 8, we really have sort of a top 3. And, I guess actually we're evening out here. So we're still getting, we got another vote, looks like. So, again, we don't necessarily have to exclude one over the other, but it kind of gives us a directionality of where we need to go. So I'm going to move on to the next question here, which is sort of a follow-up to this, which is the following. So you're going to see, again, I'm going to not show the results yet, but there's going to be 1 through 8, okay? And what we want you to do now is, in this next question, is to rank them. What are the top, how would you sequence all of these? And you don't actually have to rank all 8. You could say, just pick the top 4. You can do all 8, but what we really want to try to do is get sort of a progression, if you will, of importance that captures where people think that sequence would, how that sequence would look. And again, think about it in terms of, where do we need to put our greatest attention to, not necessarily what's the most important thing if it's already in place. And also, if there's a sequential nature to the work, where would we have to start to be able to get to the next thing? So I'll let you all think about this for a minute or so. So part of the other, just for context, within the 3D processes, obviously we don't have data that we're working off of here. We have inputs, and a lot of it is based on experience and just feel. So again, I think part of what we'll want to validate here as you look at the results when we get there is how it matches to sort of just your overall feel for where the where focus needs to be attended to. And again, this is really the starting point of becoming data driven and saying, all right, now we have to start to take these things apart. Has everybody had enough time? Can I unhide the results? Let me see what showed up here. All right, so right data, right time, realigning resources, creating a structure. And then, Heather, number 4 is enhancing integrated stakeholder engagement, empowering integrated learning and innovation, and then to optimizing regulatory administrative processes and so forth. So are people surprised by this? Any comments on the outputs? So we've got 36 responses from 41 last time.
I think it makes a lot of logical sense in some ways. I mean, beginning with the data, for me, I hear Heather's point about talking with stakeholders, but I think we really can't move until we have data to some extent, and then making sure we have the resources and the structures. So in some ways, it does make logical sense to me in terms of starting with things that are hard, but important. So I think this is the right way to go.
Yeah.
I agree with Allyson. I think there are 3 clusters, the top 3, and then 4th and 5th, and then the bottom 3. And I think those are logical. The thing about data, I think we would get a quick benefit by focusing on the data, but not sustainable progress without the 2nd and 3rd especially.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not all that surprised by the results, but I share some of the skepticism about relying solely on the data. Certainly, I've had experiences in the QI side in the hospital where I think I've had data that was relatively meaningful, but people didn't feel the support or have the time or the ability to engage and making improvement. So certainly none of this can happen without data, but just having data doesn't make any change happen.
This is Ita Berner. And I am certainly a data person, but I think you're not even going to be able to get the data unless you have the resources and the structure to use it. So I think you have to set up the system first, then get the data.
So these are great comments. And one of the things I would say about data is we collect huge amounts of data. And, I think one of the things that we're always focused on in our work is meaningful measurement, is saying what is right data. It's data just because you want the data doesn't mean it's the right data. So thinking through, almost what does right data at the right time, what does that actually mean is what we actually have to dive into. It's not just saying I have access. It's actually going deeper to that and saying, what do we need and what don't we need, and what's relevant and what's not relevant. And to a point, Etta, what you're saying about aligning resources or putting a structure in place is, you can definitely say you can't capture the data if you don't have a structure in place to collect it. But the flip is, if you don't know what you're collecting, you'll put a structure in place that corrects the wrong things. So they're interrelated, and it isn't necessarily that one supersedes the other, but they're connected, right?
Hey, Rick, this is Eric Ford. A couple thoughts.
Yeah.
I think one of the things when we talk about data, we also don't have in here as an option key performance indicators for a learning health system.
Mm-hmm.
Data is one thing, but what are the other major milestones that we would see if we were putting this in place? So having some idea of what that looks like. And I think that ties back to this resource structure, because I think if we're going to have the top management of the health system engaged and giving us resources and allocating resources, we need to give them a roadmap that is more than a bunch of researchers say, yeah, we finally got the data we wanted. Because back to the earlier point, that won't be sustainable. Mm-hmm. And I think the other part about resources, I'll say, is that's what shows the organizational commitment from the top. That'll make all the people who have to do the job of getting data aligned and put in place, signaled that their work will happen and be compensated.
Yeah.
I'm just saying third ought to be first. But with that, we need to give the top management team a clear roadmap and indicators beyond data fluidity that they can check us against, hold us accountable to.
Mm-hmm. So, again, everything is connected, and, I think your points are very well taken. And, again, data, we had the conversation prior around, data versus information, and what's the relationship between the two, and how broad, what does data actually mean? Because it has there are different data elements for different services and different applications, and we have to kind of think that through. So again, not being a proponent for, I'm not defending it as first, but again, there are things that just fundamentally need to be understood, and that you could make the case drive the progression downwards. So we would probably be realistically looking at, as a starting point, somewhere in those first three of saying, we've got to move forward. And ultimately it's going to guide us to where we need to do the work. That really is the point, is it's not excluding anything. It's basically saying how much, if we focus on those top three, for example, or top two, how much of the others will we actually take care of in the process? And where the gaps emerge is where we put attention to. So I think this is really helpful. So so we have this data here, which pretty much I think is supported as it's still the top three. Nothing has shifted there, and we have sort of a prioritization of sorts to get us started with. And really, the next question, I'm going to hand this over to Mike. To kind of close us off here with some comments, and then we have a couple more survey questions just to get some more input on, is where do we go from here? Like, how do we move this from an idea to action?
Great, so thank you, Rick, and thanks everyone for engaging today, for the comments in the Mentimeter, and also the comments on Zoom. I think it's really been validating and also helping to kind of hear new voices and shaping the direction. So I really want to thank everyone for their input and engagement. And then the next slide, please, Rick. So just want to point out, I will say this idea of UAB Learning Health System Month took a village and a huge team to prepare and come together. I could say personally, it's exceeded my expectations. The last month, the degree of engagement, the external speakers, internal speakers, it's really been tremendous. And the overwhelming enthusiasm and attendance at each of these sessions, I think shows how much interest there is in this learning health system concept. So excited about the way forward. Wanted to share with everyone that at this UAB LHS website, there's videos of all the previous Zoom presentations. So if you missed any, you can go back and see them. There's additional resources. This will also be the place where we post about next steps. We'll be emailing as well. It's a really long link there, but if you go into Google and put in UAB LHS, the first 2 or 3 hits will bring you directly to this website. So pretty easy to find. So would encourage folks to go to this website, look back at the previous presentations. Many of the presentation slides are available for kind of self-directed review, as well as recordings, other resources. And this is something that will be a living site that we kind of take forward with us. The next slide, please, Rick. So wanted to also point out, so it's Learning Health System Month. Tomorrow we have one more day in the month. And I think while our 5 seminars that we did on Tuesdays have ended, we're really fortunate through the UAB Department of Medicine to have an opportunity to actually close out the month with the Department of Medicine's grand rounds, aligning with the Learning Health System Month theme. So Journey in a Learning Health System, Lessons Learned from Successes and Failures. Dr. Nilay Shah, who is at Mayo Clinic and really leads an example of a highly functional learning health system, will share the model at Mayo and how they do things. So for those that are available, there's a registration link there. Again, I think pretty easy to find through Google and the UAB Department of Medicine or UAB event sites. But while Department of Medicine grand round certainly open to all, and I think the presentation will be well aligned with our other presentations to close out UAB Learning Health System Month. And then finally, just wanted to, next slide, please, Rick. It was just a thank you slide. And so just wanted to just to share thanks as a thank you. So this has truly been an incredible journey. And I think as Tony and I had said, thanks, Rick, in his opening comments or email, actually, this is the end of Learning Health System Month, this seminar, but it's only the beginning of our journey. And I think we've seen so much grassroots enthusiasm around Learning Health System. So want to thank the many people who have been involved so far. So too many to name individually, but the core UAB Medicine, the School of Public Health sponsorship of the Kilgore Lectureship that kicked things off for us, the CPHS program. It's been an incredible team effort. To Rick and his team, the 3D process has been amazing, and I think we're still going with that. Tony and his team. And just from the core, briefly, to thank Allyson Hall, who's led these efforts for the core, as well as Becky Ramey and Aaliyah Tuniger and Sarah Levy, who behind the scenes have really been instrumental in the success. So in thinking about next steps in the journey, part of our plan is going to be to engage a broader group and a broader audience that is interested in taking a deeper dive. So we started talking a bit today, but as these top 2 or 3 themes have emerged, we are going to invite anyone and everyone that wants to convene to come together and take the deeper dive in terms of, if these are the 2 or 3 priorities, what are the next steps to take a deeper dive, to understand existing resources, opportunities, challenges, and really chart the way forward. So in the next few weeks, you'll be hearing from us in terms of next steps, ways to sign up, to volunteer, to be engaged, and to be involved. We'll also ask, please, you'll get an evaluation for this entire LHS month. Your responses are incredibly valuable to us in terms of your experiences, but also your suggestions in terms of doing this again going forward. I think we'd love to see this become an annual event at UAB, and your feedback is so essential to make sure that it's as valuable as possible. So with that, thanking all of our speakers this month, and really thank you for all those who attended. I think the turnout has overwhelmed us, how many folks have come week after week, and really excited for next steps. So with that, Rick, we'll turn it back over to you to close us out.
Great. Well, thanks, Mike. So I'm a little out of sequence with the slides here, but I just wanted to, get a little bit more input from the group, more on just sort of the emotional side of this, and there's really 3 questions. And the first one, I'm just going to keep this open for a minute because I want to be respectful of all our time. But again, this should scroll, it probably won't, but please feel free to enter. What most excites you about creating an LHS at UAB? I'm just gonna basically open that up for, for a minute. Whoops. Yeah, and just have people, again, just free text. Collaboration, connection, involvement, leveraging strengths. People can also feel free to just share verbally on, hey, it's working actually. Maybe we only had 11 comments last time. Very nice, cutting edge, inclusive integration, connections, shared learning, culture change, awesome. Innovation. Pulling the larger system together. All right, awesome. Now, the next question is in the opposite direction. What are you most concerned about in creating an LHS at UAB? What concerns you the most? I'm gonna also just put a timer on here. So engaging faculty and staff, that was kind of a big thing, is making sure we get to the front end and connect all the dots. Excitement dying out. Momentum. Engagement is a big deal. Leadership, clinicians, all the way through, vertically and horizontally. Skepticism, not knowing what this is about. Is it going to work? Excellent. All right, about 10 seconds. All right, one more and then you're free. This is really actually just a word cloud. What 3 words describe your feelings about creating an LHS at UAB? I'll do the same here so that we. They can be separate words, by the way. It doesn't have to be a 3-word tweet. Collaboration, excitement. Nice. Opportunity. Apprehension, some good counterbalance. Needed, optimism. Less silos. Let's see what else shows up. All right, awesome. So excitement, opportunity, collaboration look to me to be the big players. Innovations in there. Awesome. Well, again, I will echo, Mike, your comments about, again, come back to thank you, thank you, thank you. I think we're off to a great start. We've got a lot of great engagement, and the work begins here as far as actually moving it forward. So we will be reaching out and look forward to people's engagement any way that they can, and we will do our best to be as inclusive as possible and find ways to make it fit within your workflow. So thank you all and have a great rest of the afternoon.
Great. Take care. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks.